Ooh,
Oh, there we go. It
recordings
stopped
in
us going.
progress. Great. Well, Ian O'Brien is an associate professor of literacy at the College of Charleston in South Carolina, and his research focuses on the dispositions and literacy practices of individuals as they read and write and communicate in online or hybrid spaces. He's the author of many journal articles, and he has a blog that comes out every week and a newsletter type, and he has his own website that we can put you. There you go. Connect with Ian and he can help you through all your worries about AI. Ian, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, it's good to see some friends and say hello and make sure that you're all doing okay. I will share my screen, but I'm hoping that we have more of a discussion about these topics. I think I'm going to try and make the case that one of the things that was said right before we started recording is that there's a lot of hyperbole and a lot of hysteria around these technologies. And one of the things that we are very good at when it comes to education is we're very good at when new technologies come around that could have the potential to disrupt what we're doing in our classrooms. We view it as, okay, well, students are going to use it to cheat, or this is not fair, like you need to learn how I learned, or you need to work the way that I worked. And there's a lot of merit in those discussions, but I think that we need more time to think about what could and should we do with these technologies as opposed to just being fearful of them. Because there's a lot of question marks. I appreciate the hyperbole and hysteria, but we have very serious discussions that we need to have about these technologies, and we need to think deeply about what they can and cannot do. And so I shared a slide deck out in the chat for my friends, but then also I think I can share my screen. I'm gonna try this. Um, do you all mind if I just keep it open that way, or do you want to do full screen?
I'm fine with it this way.
I want to
It's
give you the
very
full.
clear.
We're all educators, so we've seen behind the scenes on a Google slide deck. So, um, but basically, as was said already, my name is Ian O'Byrne. You can find me online. Um, I am sharing a lot less online than I used to. Another talk for another day. But in this session, I want to think a little bit about AI. Want to think a little bit about opportunities to reimagine what's happening in our classrooms and think about uh, automation, think about collaboration, think about risks, think about challenges that are out there. But one of the things that I'm always cognizant of is a former colleague of mine would always, uh, you know, make sure that I was focusing on the fact that sometimes when we have high tech, we lose high touch. And my fear is that we, are so sure that this is going to be totally bad for us or totally good for us that we sort of ignore opportunities that it could reimagine what happens and think about power in the classroom. Um, but to get started, I'm interested in all of you. How are you currently thinking about or using AI, artificial intelligence, in your teaching and learning or personal or professional work?
So right now I'm kind of having to do more like educating the class on how to use it. Just like any new technology you incorporate, you got to teach them how to use it first. Um, so usually just like a little bell ringer, maybe like once a week, every other week, just okay, we're studying um like doing a lot of like looking at laws and stuff, and kids don't, no one likes to read laws, and the adults don't like to read laws. um like how can we use AI to kind of reword those complex things into simpler terms, and just showing that how it's a useful tool and either not a scary tool or a cheating tool. So right now it's just more of like educating how to use it.
And you are what, high school?
Yes.
So you
Yeah, I
have
have
a
I have mostly like juniors and seniors. So
It's pretty cool. So a little bell ringer activity, like come in, and how might it
yeah.
look as if I was a student in your classroom, what would I see and do?
So like the one we're planning for next week, I think we're doing like current events. So you'd come in, you would see a prompt up on the board of like whatever's big in the news. It's probably going to be something with the election cycle going on. Um, we haven't like nailed it down yet because current events are still changing.
Still current.
But you come in, you'd see a topic on the board for the current event. And basically I asked the kids before the bell rings to just be thinking about like, what do you already know about this?
Mhm.
And then we'll come in and sort of break down like how I think we're going to use how to use AI to find credible sources.
Mhm.
Because right now most of my kids just Google 2024 election and then just get all the
Yeah.
mess.
Yeah.
So how can we use AI? And we're going to practice and be like, what's the type of things we should be typing into AI? How can we read its results? If it gives us links to credible articles, how do we know it's a good link? How is it not? How do we word the things into that program to get the good results we want? And how that could speed up eventually the research process when we get to writing papers and all.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I notice is that with as I started folding, I mean it was a little over a year ago that ChatGPT was launched. And this is nuts. And one of the things I noticed as I started using it in my own work and in my own teaching and learning is how bad Google search was getting. You know, you don't recognize it. And I found that I was searching for things, but then adding Reddit to the end of my search so that I could get like a human voice added into it. But it was, it I recognize how ancient like Google search seemed to me. Um, you know, and the problems with that. And as I'm saying that, my phone is like, wait a minute, we're not that bad. No, you are that bad. I don't trust you anymore. Brooke, what do you do? How are you feeling about AI?
So I haven't used it actively as much in the classroom, but I began the year with a conversation about it, because I think one of my big things, even before AI came into the forefront, has been about engagement. And so I wanted to talk to my kids more as like AI as like a posture we should take towards AI rather than the specifics. Um, so our conversation we began with was like, what is the purpose of high school? As an English teacher, when I'm getting writing constantly, I'm getting writing from them. Of course, they want to use AI because that's a difficult task. And that's a task that now AI can help them with. And so I kind of wanted to give them a base, almost like an ethics basis, not just of like, you
Yeah,
shouldn't do this because it's morally wrong,
yeah.
but more that you shouldn't do this because if the purpose of high school is to give you agency in the world, you want to be able to write. And if the purpose of high school is just to check something off, then yeah, of course, use AI. So try to really get that motivation of you want to be able to use these tools and not have these tools use you and not have these companies use you. So, but that's very theoretical, which is my strength, and getting it down into the active like lessons I can do is, you know, a little more difficult.
You rock. Yeah, I'm buying everything that you're selling. I agree with you 100%. I think that it's, you know, we have really strong discussions that we could and should have about ethics right now. We have discussions about trust and truth. I think that, you know, former English language arts teacher, high school English teacher, literacy professor, about to get kicked out of the literacy community. You know, I think that one of the challenges that we see with this is that we have systems set up in place in education so that most of the way that we evaluate you is based upon grades, GPA, and your command of standard academic English. And that's from leaving from K-12 and leaving K-12 into college and career, or at least college. And now we have these machines, these agents that can replicate that in seconds. And so on one hand, it's my opinion, not a very popular opinion. It's really interesting because we have the opportunity to level the playing field. We have the opportunity to support non-native English speakers. We have this, the opportunity to support people that might struggle writing and getting ideas out as they write, and clarify their thinking. And so there's a lot of people that have concerns about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a secondary interest for me because I'm moving. I work in Tennessee now, but I'm moving to Taipei, Taiwan. And so I'll be working with students who speak English, but obviously not their first language. And so working with them to try to get into US universities, and AI absolutely could be a good tool for that, but being able to bridge that line between supporting students who are not native English speakers and still allowing them to express their own ideas is a difficult line, I think.
Yeah. I had a piece oh, sorry, go ahead, keep going.
No, it was me, Ian. I want to share what I'm
Yeah,
doing
no,
with it, 'cause
go.
it ties into what Brooke is saying. I am working the tax season for a company, and a lot of our training was AI training, and it was supposed to be interactive, where they would set us up and we would finish the scenario. And I was failing it every time. And they would say, please try again. I couldn't hear you. Please try again. Please try again. So I get to work and they say, it doesn't like our accent. And that was the problem. It wouldn't accept the words I was saying because it didn't like my accent. And so it was just failing me every time. And they said, finally, just type in your answer, type it into the box and it will accept it and you'll be able to move on. So for training, I don't know that it is up to par yet because it's not adaptable enough. And that was a company called Zenerate, just for FYI. What do you know about training and AI?
Well, I think it's one of the things I'll talk about in this little discussion is, we have to think about the data that's used to train these models and what the models are trained to do. That's one of the biggest. I mean, there are larger, bigger questions about who's building them and the money and the ideologies behind them. I think we need to have those discussions. We need to also understand that as we use these models, we're training these models, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the number one thing that screams to me from what you've just said is that these models were trained. Most of these models were trained using, the internet since the internet has been here in our lives for the last 12, 13 years, at least a decade, has been largely native English speakers, and it privileges a certain population. The internet was just about to get a lot more diverse, and it was going to be a lot more bilingual, multilingual, a lot of other discourses. You've probably noticed that over the last couple of years or last year and a half, you've come across websites that have languages other than just English. But a lot of these models were trained using the data sources that were out there. So there is research that's coming out that says that it's the agents are looking for a specific tone. They're looking for a lot of the image creation tools will create someone smiling, and it would be like that typical North American white person smile, very toothy, and but not everybody smiles that way. And so it's interesting thinking about how this shapes or reflects or tries to understand the ways in which we interact. Yeah, I agree with you. That to me would be, Charlene, that would be terrifying to me. It would be infuriating to me. I'm also thinking about, that's two steps away from us, someone developing a bot or an agent that will talk to that agent, so it will pass. And so we quickly get to a space where my agent and my bot's going to talk to your agent and your bot, and we never even have to talk to each other. So
Well, what was I figure, it's like, I know there's got to be a way to beat the system. And what
Yeah.
I finally did was just read back to it what it was reading to what it was saying to me, and it accepted it because I got in all the key words that they wanted me to get in. And I was angry at myself because I was cheating the system. It wouldn't take my answer, it had to have the answer.
Yeah, but the thing to remember is that the system's broken. These companies
Agreed.
are they're buying bots or agents off the shelf, not fully knowing what they do, just because it seems like, hey, I can stick this out there and it's a layer of interference or a barrier before I have to deal with you. So instead of me interviewing you and talking to you and stuff like that, or training you, I'm going to stick you with this agent and see if you peter out or you go through the gauntlet. And it's interesting because
Yes.
some of the interesting, I mean, it seems like forever ago when I wrote a piece for the Chronicle. I mean, not the Chronicle, the Conversation. That's it. Some of the really interesting stuff was with Duolingo, going back to Brooke's point. Duolingo has been on the forefront of a lot of these AI machine learning technologies. And now some of the coolest stuff that I've seen and played with is the stuff coming out of Khan Academy. Not to bury the lead, but my dream is, this is the last slide or the last couple ideas of my talk. I've got a third grader here in the house. I dream of a world where, as she learns and interacts online and is in Teams or Google Classroom or whatever, there is some sort of agent that's learning along with her. And it's seeing the mistakes that she makes and it's seeing what she's learned. And then so later on, when my little tiny tyke gets to Tori's class, then she can struggle in Tori's class. And then all of a sudden the bot is like, yeah, but you already know this. You did something like this back in 8th grade. So it's almost like, imagine the wealth of Google Docs and Office materials and stuff on our hard drive. Imagine easier access to that and it being able to like remind you, but then also see places where you might have gotten stuck in the past. It's like, hey, in the past you got stuck in, you're taking a stats class and your bot is like, hey, you got stuck doing the same sort of thing when you're in algebra 2 in high school. So this is how you learn and got around it. We might be able to do the same here. Lots of opportunities. Hey, Stacy, welcome. Stacy, welcome to the group. Stacy's hanging up right now. The bot's kicking her out. So I'm going to switch to the next slide if I can. So a couple definitions. I think that one of the things that I'm noticing is that there's, as we said before, there's a lot of hyperbole and a lot of hysteria around this. And there's a lot of discussions about, what can we do? What can we not do with these technologies? What are they able to do? Where do they come from? There's also certain parameters or a parking lot. I try to situate this discussion at some point. Whenever we talk about AI, at some point the discussion turns into, well, I heard it's going to end all civilization. So my hope is to try and contain that discussion. Do I have some of those same concerns? Yeah, my concerns are a little bit different, but I try to contain this a little bit. So first of all, AI, umbrella term, and what we're thinking about is theories or computer systems or software that are trying to figure out ways to allow machines to perform tasks that we would traditionally require or request for human intelligence. Taking a step further, we start to drill down a little bit more and we get into machine learning. And machine learning is we're developing and using algorithms and statistical models to allow computer systems to learn and adapt without needing specific instructions. One of the things to keep in mind is that when we think about this, please understand that machine learning and AI have been they've been in our lives for some time. This is not new. Okay, yes, ChatGPT is a little over a year old. Technically, it's older than that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But these agents, machine learning and AI, has been in our life for some time. The way that it shows itself is your Netflix queue, your Amazon queue. It's paying attention to stuff you like on Netflix, and it's suggesting new shows that you might like to watch. Netflix is also using it to figure out new shows that they might want to invest in and pay for because they know that you're probably going to watch it. Machine learning is watching your Amazon cart and following you around the internet and then double and tripling down on those sources. Machine learning and AI, to some extent, is guiding our social media searches, our social media feed, and stuff like that. So in a way, I am thankful for these bots and these agents because it gives us a little bit more agency, to use a term that we used before. I think now we can sort of converse with these. I think for the last couple of years, the internet has become largely unintelligible. We haven't understood what's happening behind the scenes. And I think to a certain extent, not totally, but I think it's a little bit better because we can try and make some sense and, to use a term that people are going to get mad at me about, converse a little bit with these agents. We get into natural language processing. It's using AI, computer science, and linguistics to make sense of human language, understand and process human language. So a lot of the bots that we talk about, a lot of the AI agents or machine learning agents that we're talking about, for the most part, are trained on human language, predominantly academic English or standard academic English, but they're trained on English, and they are there to converse with you. There are other bots that are out there. There are other machine learning tools that are fantastic. We have tools that can take a prompt or two and create images or video or audio. There's a lot of incredible ways that we can use machine learning, but most of the stuff that we see and we think about right now, especially in education, is just text-based and natural language processing. The really interesting stuff comes when we talk about generative AI. And so thankfully, this session is not called ChatGPT. I think that one of the concerns is that we often lump ChatGPT into everything. As I'll talk about in a minute, ChatGPT is just one source, but really what we're talking about is generative AI. And so as you engage in discussions, if you take nothing from this talk today, just start thinking more about generative AI and thinking about generative AI and some of these tools or some of these agents. We have this sequence of AI, machine learning, and natural language processing, but really what we're interested in right now is generative AI. Yes, there is artificial general intelligence. That's another talk for another day. But for the most part, what we're going to talk about today is generative AI. And like I said, there's multiple versions out there. There's image generators, there's audio generators that are fantastic. So there's audio generators that there's actually audio and a video generator out there that you can go in. For those of us that are a little bit apprehensive about talking in front of a camera or recording, a lecture for our students, there's AI that you can record some audio and video of yourself, and then you can give it a script, and it will basically recreate the audio and video of you doing that talk. And then more to the point, you can go in and as you record audio or video, you can look at the transcript and you can edit the transcript, and then the AI tool, the generative AI tool, will go back and it will edit the audio and video based on just your text. So just really fantastic opportunities to change teaching and learning materials. A lot of really interesting LLMs, large language models for coding. Previously, there was this mindset that I need to learn Python or I need to figure out different ways to code a new bot or a new tool or an app. And now there are tools that I can just have a dialogue or a discussion with an AI tool and say, hey, I want to create a video game that does these things, and it will walk me through the process of how to do that. Will it be perfect at the very beginning? No, it won't. But it'll help shortcut that. So large language models and chatbots, we're seeing that pop up in our institutions. I know my institution, they have a you know, a chat bot that's like a help bot, like an AI infused chat bot. I think really what we're going to see is just the same way that you would buy a watch and you'd have to decide, do I want this to be online or not? Or a toaster oven or your fridge, does it have like Internet of Things connectivity? I think that we are quickly headed to the space where when you buy a new product, you're going to have to decide, do I want, you know, AI as part of this and generative AI as part of this or not? And really that decision might have already been made for us. And we'll talk about why. So some of the LLMs that you think about, Jennifer, I haven't heard about Blackboard Ultra yet. Jennifer's dropping bombs over in the chat, and I have not played with Blackboard Ultra yet. I have to play with that. So ChatGPT, one of the things to keep in mind is that ChatGPT is a model from OpenAI, which OpenAI has had a lot of news right around the holiday season. OpenAI, for the most part, is open in name only at this point. OpenAI is a company. There are multiple models. OpenAI is heavily funded by Microsoft and other entities, but for the most part now it's just Microsoft. OpenAI, so ChatGPT is version 3.5 of the large language model by OpenAI. And if you dig into the history of this stuff, which I do because I don't have a life, one of the things that's interesting is when we think about these large language models, they're structured, they're supervised and unsupervised learning. They're structured and unstructured learning. And so one of the things they'll do is they'll present the model with a large data set and say, we want you to identify all the apples in this data set. And it will go forth and it will identify all the apples. Unsupervised, unstructured is basically saying, go into this data set and tell us what you find. And then the machine will come back and say, hey, we found apples, bananas, oranges, you know, and then that's when a researcher or a team could go in and revisit that. So the interesting thing is that with these models, for the most part, you're dealing with a closed data set. You're dealing with like all the Google book searches that were there before, or all of Wikipedia, or all of Reddit. You're dealing with closed data sets that have already passed, that people have left that data behind online, or research teams. And so one of the brilliant / accidental things that happened with ChatGPT is OpenAI was getting ready to release GPT-4, and they realized what we need is we need a way for the model to interact with random people and get random prompts and queries and illogical, nonsensical queries, maybe in English, maybe not. And so what they created was a playground. They created an environment, and that environment is ChatGPT. So they created a space, an environment that you could interact with, and random people could go in and just search anything to their heart's delight, and they could interact. And so GPT-4 was sort of ready to go, and they said, we'll put this old model 3.5 in, and that was ChatGPT. That was last holiday season, you know, a little over a year ago. One of the interesting things is that we hear from our colleagues and friends, ban ChatGPT, ban it, just ban it. And what's interesting is that OpenAI, heavily funded by Microsoft, as we said, and so we're seeing a lot of the OpenAI ChatGPT models and a lot of LLMs folded into Microsoft products. So now when you install Windows on your machine, it's going to fold in Copilot. You know, when you use Office and you use Edge, the browser, it's going to fold in, you know, ChatGPT, that the LLM from OpenAI is baked right in there. There's some belief that you can get to GPT-4 faster if you use a lot of Microsoft products. So a lot of this stuff is already baked into the system. Google has a product called Bard. When it first came out, not really a big fan, still trying to see if it has value, still continue to play with it. There's a lot of discussion about how it will get better. It's really interesting because Google had a leg up with the amount of data they have about a lot of us. So I was not hoping, but interested to see what they would do with it. Haven't really seen that much good stuff. And it's interesting because Google and Alphabet, the company above Google, they, like I said, they had a lot of leg up and they had a lot of data. They had a lot of scraping and a lot of analytics on the web, a lot of machine learning with voice, but all for naught at this point. One of my really, for me, LLMs and a lot of the generative AI tools, one of my favorite ones to use is Claude. I love Claude by Anthropic. Use Claude all the time. You can see Claude is here. Love Claude mainly because it will, fold in more text. The limits on the text are a lot broader. I'm also interested in a lot of the open source AI tools. So I'm really Hugging Face has a lot of AI tools that you can use and play with. The other thing that's interesting is that I play with a lot of Google Colab. So imagine Google Docs, but a space that you can sort of like pick up and run AI tools. So a lot of the things that interest me right now is AI tools that I can run on my own. And there's reason for that, but just trying to make sense of what tools I might use. What tools do you all use? Are you using ChatGPT, Bing, Bard, Claude, other stuff? What are you using?
I'm mostly using ChatGPT just because it is kind of like the public, known to the world one. I played with Bard a little bit in my master's program and did not like it.
Yeah.
But I'm really interested in Claude because I like using Notion and did not know that that was what was
Yeah.
being used there. So I might check that one out.
Yeah, Anthropic is really Anthropic. The company behind it, um, I first heard about Claude a little while ago. They've changed their pay model a little bit. For it would limit you for like 3 searches per day. The nice thing about Claude is that you can add in large blocks of text. So there's opportunities to like dump in a lot of content and it will search through and make sense of it. Yeah, I mean, I love it. I'm happy that you brought up Notion too. There's a lot of, Notion. I'm a, uh, I went to rehab for Evernote and broke free of Evernote, but now I use Obsidian, like a markdown tool. And so Notion has a lot of AI built into it. And one of the things I was hoping we see with Bard and Google is that think about all your Google Docs, have a space where it could be like, hey, you're working on a paper right now. You wrote 2 or 3 papers just like this that never got submitted. Here you go, or slide decks or whatever. But the opportunity to say, hey, I need to do a PowerPoint on and talk about generative AI, you're having a tool that could look through your notes and your work and your ideas and say, hey, we'll get that started for you. Go have a cup of coffee and come back. It'll be ready. What else? What other tools are you all using?
I'm not using it, but I'd love to like get some opinion because my kids, when I mention AI, my ones that hate it is because their experience with it is Snapchat.
Mhm.
And so they hate AI because they think it's that conversational AI.
Yeah,
And they think it's annoying and they think it's, all lies, but it's, context as well as it is Snapchat.
I haven't seen this before.
Oh, they're on it all the time. I mean, they're always on Snapchat all the time too, but they want to text through Snapchat. So or you just use regular text messages, they use Snapchat to text
Yeah,
because it will delete. But if they don't have anyone to snap at the moment, they don't want to look like, oh, I don't have friends. So they'll talk to the AI.
that's
And so they're
interesting.
using it all the time.
I mean, it's one of the things that intrigues me is that I think there's the opportunity to have, and I've written about this a long time ago, way before this buzz, but the opportunity to have like an AI or a bot as a teacher assistant in your class. Because I mean, think about all the random, very important questions that you get from students. And I think there's the opportunity to have an agent or a bot or somebody that's on the or something on the front lines that's sort of like, I already answered that in class. That's over here. Or no, he was wrong. The class is on Wednesday. It's not Tuesday. He was just, and so I think having an agent that sort of like knows what's going on would be helpful. But I could see how people would get unnerved and a little bit weirded out by that.
Yeah, I've been using recently, and it's not perfect, but I've been playing with Magic School AI,
Haven't
and
seen it.
I wish I would have had that as a first year teacher. I was like, now it's not as much of a resource, but I mean, it can help you draft parent emails. It can differentiate instruction.
Oh
It
yeah,
can break down standards and everything for you.
yeah,
Help translate text in other languages.
yeah,
Like it is like a little personal assistant. And then Co-Grader has been good to help with grading. So anything text-based, you can put in any rubrics or standards you want, put in the instructions, upload from Google Classroom. It'll grade it all for you, and it'll give the kids like something they excelled at, something they need to work on, and something they didn't do good.
yeah.
And it's like I graded assignments today through it. I just sat back and made
Wow.
copies while it did that, and I just checked behind it to make sure it's legit.
I think I'm saving those. I'm using those for my next talk. Thank you. So one of the things you want to think about is like, how do we envision this? So to make sense of a transitory world, one of the things that we often do is we try to relate it to something we already know. And so I really enjoy, if you're trying to unpack this, this book, Atlas of AI, really good, thorough discussion about this. Not as much of the vitriol and hate and hyperbole. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And one of the things that Crawford brings up in there is brings up this idea of viewing AI as an atlas or a series of maps. And if we think about, many of us have a history in our classrooms where, at least I remember walking into like my middle school, high school classroom and seeing the maps up on the front of the classroom, and Russia, the Soviet Union was gigantic and it was red and it was like over top of the US. And I was like, that's amazing. Like they are huge. We're so tiny. And then you realize that there's a lot of there's some truth, there's some fiction, there is some, these are recreations of what's really out there. To some extent, people have sort of, taken past history and recreated these as a way to think of the world or view the world. But the idea is that these are subjective, these are political, these are they're scientific collections as much as they are just an invention or an intervention. And so there's this thought of, how do we view this? This seems to me to be the best way, and this is one of the viewpoints I have on this, is that this really is an atlas. So is this meant to be perfect? No, it's not. This is a recreation. This is it's taking old info and sending it back out there. So this is some of the piece that I had, and I have a link and I can share it. The piece that I had in the conversation back in the day. This is so old, it's not even funny. April. But basically, the good news is that this is really good at summarizing knowledge and correcting and improving existing ideas. I have a lot of colleagues and friends that that they think that they scorn this use of AI, and they this evidence of me using AI is just another example of what a fraud I am. And I agree with them that I'm a fraud, but at the same time, a lot of my colleagues and friends will use Grammarly, and I'm like, if we're willing to pay for Grammarly, where's the difference? Not much of a difference. And so I think that it's good at looking at blocks of text and making sense of it. It's good at, I've had manuscripts that I look at, and after you're done writing, it's frankenpaper and it's all over the place. And there's an opportunity to put the text into the AI, into a generative AI tool, and say, what am I actually saying here? Just give me an outline of the paper. And with colleagues, I'll dump the paper in and it'll give us an outline. And we're like, ooh, that's not what we wanted to say. You know, the other thing is that this is mostly limited to English speakers. You know, that is a huge problem. It's impossible to model the limitations. It's impossible to really understand the limitations that are there. And these models hallucinate. These models are recreating what it thinks it's learned in the past. They are, you know, trying to guess what the next word would be. It invents sources, have it write a paragraph or two and cite citations. You better go back and check those citations yourself because they do not exist. And it looks pretty good, but you want to think through, you know, if you are a struggling writer, if you are a teacher that's getting up and running and trying to figure out lesson planning and how to best, you know, deal with a rubric or embed, you know, attract student interest, or if you are, you know, in my fields, I know I have academics that, you know, they're trying to figure out, how do I write a proposal for this specific conference, or how do I write for this journal and stuff like that. It's really, really good at trying to figure those mechanics and the discourse systems out. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I've been playing with AI tools, you know, in the last couple months. So one of the things I've been doing is in one of my classes, in my language and lit class, I asked, and this is last fall. So keep in mind, OpenAI, ChatGPT was launched not this December, November, but a year ago. So I sat with students and I said, how many of you are playing with ChatGPT or these AI tools? And I had a bunch of freshmen and then juniors and seniors, and my juniors and seniors said, we're not using that. And these are pre-service teachers, not using it, not worth our time. And so I said, okay, so as I begin my classes, I always begin with like a vibe check or reality check, like what are things happening in your life? And I had a student talking about their high school class they were in for clinical practice, talking about war and society. And so as a student, you know, as I'm asking them about using generative AI tools, I said, that's interesting. And I just, as the class is getting settled and talking with me, I just open up ChatGPT and I type, write my 5-paragraph essay about war and society. Fills up the screen. So as the students are talking, they're like, interesting. Okay. So I stopped and I said, what are your thoughts about this? You know, pre-service teachers, you know, middle grade, secondary folks, all training to be science, social studies, math, ELA, phys ed, special ed. And most of the students in the class, pre-service teachers said, if a kid were to use that in my class, they're lazy. It's just laziness. They're cheating themselves also. They're lazy and cheating themselves. And some of the students in the class started this like back and forth with like, basically it amounted to like, that's not how I was trained to learn, how I was trained to write. And they basically, pre-service teachers, they equated this to, in K-12, one of the big things I learned in K-12 was to write essays. And I'm like, is that it? Like, is that, as a former ELA teacher, I hope that's not the only thing you learn is how to write essays. So like, yep, write essays. And I said, and they said, in order to survive and succeed, you need to read and write and interact with others. I said, it's interesting. So then as they're talking, another student brought up the fact that they were a high school bio teacher teaching clinical practice, and their cooperating teacher taught a class about forensic science. And they were really, really mad because the teacher in forensic science had a background in forensic science, and so they were mad that they had cool stories. And we've all had those teacher friends that they've had all the, you know, the fun stories to share in class. And so I was like, interesting. So as the student is sharing, I say in Sonic, a different tool. So in Sonic, which I was using a lot of, I said, can you give me a lesson plan about forensic science for high school bio class? Same thing. So as the students are talking, they're just like, what is this? And then, so at the end of the whole chat, and I was using Sonic and Chat Sonic, I said, you mentioned a handout in this, I said, can you write me a lesson plan? It gave me a whole lesson plan, objectives and everything, assessment. And it said, hey, you should do a handout. I said, can you give me the handout? I said, sure. Here's the handout. And then I said, you also said there's a PowerPoint or a demonstration. Can you give me the demonstration? Sure. Gave me everything. So with 3 prompts it gave me, and so some of you are like, what did he say? So I used to use a lot of Sonic. So Sonic, there's Sonic, there's Chat Sonic, and then something else, Bot Sonic. I used it for a while. I liked it a lot. I'm not on it anymore. But within a couple prompts, it gave me full lesson plan. And I have a blog post on this. I share the whole lesson plan and everything. So you can go through and critique it. Lesson plan, PowerPoint, and a handout. And so as I'm doing that, the student that is talking about, bio teacher, high school bio teacher, I wish I was a forensic scientist back in the day. The student is like, I wish I had this a week ago. Like, this would have saved me a lot of time. I don't know about all of your daily interactions, but my pre-cert teachers training to be teachers there's not enough hours in the day. And so they were like, this is a really good starting point for me to get off and running. And I was like, that's interesting, And so one of the things that, so as we were talking a little bit more, students were like, and I know that a lot of my colleagues, the fact that a teacher would just copy paste a lesson plan or a unit plan or handouts from a generative AI tool would be terrified of that. But one of the things that I know is that, good teachers borrow, great teachers modify. It's a good starting point. But I think there's a lot of privileging involved. Another thing I did is over the summer, I was involved in a hackathon with Carnegie Mellon and University of Tartu. So I was involved with a bunch of computer scientists, doc students, business folks about tools that we could create. So I was involved. There was a medicine one, an education one, and a finance and economics one. I was in I applied for all 3. My medicine idea was bombed out. My education one didn't go far, but my finance and economics team, we made it to the final rounds. Okay, which completely absurd. For the education one of the things that I was interested in is the opportunity to create a simulated learning environment where students could go in and talk to bots and agents and pitch ideas. Okay. This is not a new idea. This is an idea that comes out of Stanford. This is, and I can share the piece, but basically what they create is this virtual space where you can talk and interact with bots. And so what I was thinking is, what if you had, let's say you had a collaborative project in a class and students are apprehensive, concerned about, they want to talk to you as a classroom teacher and get a feeling on their idea before they pitch it to others. What if they could go into a safe space and sort of pitch it to a bot or an agent? And the bot or the agent, you could change who that person was supposed to represent. So it'd be an idea to pitch it. Also thought about my pre-service teachers being able to pitch it to others. We called it Collaborate Think. There's a way to help guide the learning process. We actually had a prototype out there so you can test it out. But the idea was that it's a large language model. We used a tool called LangChain, an open source. And the only thing you need to know about LangChain is that LangChain is basically a way to take an existing data set of your own and give it to the bot. So imagine you deal with like your chat GPT, and instead of it being able to use all the internet or some of the internet, you say, all I want you to look at is my high school history textbook, or all I want you to look at is my Google Drive. So that's the power of LangChain, and you can play with LangChain on your own. The use cases I already talked about, but the idea here is that you would have data sources that you give to it, and then things that you keep out, but then the generative AI would be able to play with it. Okay. So let's talk about the challenges here. Okay. One of the things that keeps me up at night is this idea of maker and manager. So there's a Google post that's out there about makers and managers and how we should schedule our time so that we spend more of our time being creative and makers and not just managing others. Okay. And so one of my concerns, and someone said this earlier, is, I think Brooke brought it up, is I see a future where businesses, entities, as Charlene said before, they're going to hire the agent and the bot to do some of the work. And so instead of getting people, paying people to go be creative and think of new ways and processes and ideas, instead, we're going to pay fewer amount of people to basically pump info into the bot or the agent and then get the results from the agent and make sense of which we think the best ones are so we can hand it to our superiors. Okay. So in that, are we, who is managing who? Like, are we managing the bots or the bots managing us? If we're basically seeding creativity and ingenuity and human empathy and all that to these agents, to me, that's problematic. And so what is the role of the human in these interactions? There's also a real need to think about privacy, data literacy. Keep in mind that as you use these tools, as you use ChatGPT, as you use Claude, as you use Bard, you are training the tools. That's why earlier in this talk, I focused on GPT 3.5 and ChatGPT, is they needed a space so that you can play with it. And so one of the ways, and I'll be careful about what I say right now because they are increasingly litigious, turn it in. So turn it in is a hot button. Turn it in. My institution had a little bit of dialogue. We are choosing not to pay for the AI version of Turn It In because I don't think it's that good. No one's watching this. But it's also we're training that model to try and learn and do better. But we want to think about the privacy and security and data literacy questions and issues that we have. And one of the last things is keep in mind that these tools, these products were created using information and ideas that, residue that we left behind on the internet. Okay, they were trained, many of them were trained using the Google book search from 15 years ago, 10 years ago. They were trained using Reddit. They were trained scraping internet from social media or from Wikipedia. So the good, bad, and the ugly that was online, a lot of that was used to train these sources. And so we want to think about, are we having new ideas or just a regurgitation of stuff that we had in the past? And with that, I'll stop talking. What questions do you all have?
I'm just gonna say, wow, my mind is blown because the only thing I thought was it's going to be writing students' papers for them. I didn't understand any of it. And so until I got into the class where it was teaching me, but it is a tool for good, but can be used for evil. And we're the ones that have to teach the difference.
Well, I mean, let's aim small, miss small. Let's think about writing. So if I am a student in 8th grade, let's say I'm a traditional student, I'm a native English speaker, I'm sitting in your English classroom, I'm an 8th grader. I don't really struggle with forming ideas or writing papers and stuff like that. If my teacher throws a 5-paragraph essay at me, I can handle that. I can knock that out of the park. I can figure it out a couple times. But then if the teacher wants me to expand my vocab and get new ideas or write a little bit more clearly, I can have tools that will help support that. But if I'm a student that struggles, I mean, I remember back when I was in my teacher ed program, one of my tech teachers, and then I taught it as an Intel master teacher. We had this super cool technique of taking a Word doc and putting hidden text in the Word doc, and so we do the same thing now with Google Docs, where we give like a scaffold, an outline of what to write about. You could say to a bot, hey, I need to do a 5-paragraph essay on causes of, the outcomes of the American Revolution or something like that. And it would say, here's the things you need to bring up. And then the student goes off and writes.
Right. And so that's little more than an encyclopedia or a resource book, an informational text that is okay. I mean, you're searching for the answer and you're turning it into sentences that communicate your learning. Yeah, I see that. I definitely can see that as an asset.
Other thoughts? How y'all feeling?
I wonder how we communicate that to students, the use of it as a source rather than something that's generating ideas, even though it is generating ideas. And I guess, well, let me stop there. That first thought. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. Like how do we communicate that to students, that because it has always been difficult, even when it's simple as a search engine, which is, in itself AI. When they're using Google and having them use that for sources, it's been difficult to get them to understand how to use it efficiently and how to use it effectively, how to understand what part they need to generate and what part is okay to take from something else and how to do that. So yeah, how do we communicate to them what their role is and what the tool's role is?
Yeah. Excellent question. One of the things so I've been thinking and writing a lot about this, and you can find all the stuff that's out there online. One of the points that always is true for me when it comes to technology and youth is that I generally trust youth. I trust youth more with technology than I do most adults. Not a popular point that I brought up multiple times, but I don't think adults know how to use technology or these spaces. I think youth have a better idea. And so the number one thing would be open dialogue. Just talk, and then we have pieces out there about parents. We've written stuff, we've conducted research with our kids and wrote about it in JAWL and elsewhere. But I would say number one thing is open lines of communication and dialogue. And number two, I urge, as I've worked on some of these position papers, one of the things that I say to colleagues and friends that are on these papers with me is, I would love to take a bunch of middle school kids or high school kids or even like third graders like my daughter and let them play with some of these technologies. Let them play and see what they come up with and what are their thoughts about it. So bring them into Midjourney or Playground.ai and play with image tools or some of the audio editing tools, or show them, okay, we're studying whatever we're studying now in our class, and typically I would have you write a paragraph or an essay, or I'd have you do a speech in class, or we're going to make a paper bag book report, or whatever the assessment is. Are there other ways that we could use some of these tools to show evidence of that learning? So I would say dialogue and just some open dialogue with youth about what they think about it, but then also let them play with some of these tools. As you come across new tools, it's like, hey, I found something new today. What are your thoughts about this? There's a lot of trust involved in that. There's a lot of, I mean, that's human, that's Ed Psych 101. That's just trust in your classroom and trust in your learning environment. But it's basically taking spaces so that students can say, you know what, I believe that that my teacher is a co-learner with me. and they're trying to figure this out with me. And they are trusting me, so I'm going to trust them as well. Because a lot of, especially the students I've interacted with, there was a lot of trepidation of like, oh, you're going to turn this into honor board and stuff like that. I'm like, we're beyond that. Like, let me see what you're doing and why, and let me understand why you're trying to do this. What was your second question?
I hadn't quite formulated it into a question. It was going to be one of those like actually a comment things, and I don't want to be that person. So
Yeah, those are always
I'm
the
trying
best
to,
ones. Go for it. Let it fly. Charlene will edit this
I'm
out
trying
later.
I I think on the teacher end, I have like so many layers to this thought. So pardon my rambling. But on the teacher end of like using it for lesson plans, it seems just like using anything else for lesson plans. So my district right now is our English teachers are required to teach entirely out of a textbook. Now, I don't do this, but I'm also leaving. So, but we have our PowerPoints and our worksheets and our text all chosen for us. So the role of the teacher is extremely limited. We don't design. We were told we don't have to plan lessons. We just prepare to teach. So obviously, like with what you said, we could use that as a basis and like do our own things with it and like use it as a map and a thing to help new teachers and whatever, which is very similar to what AI could do. But so I wonder then how is using AI for lesson plans different than a canned curriculum? How does that overall affect the teaching profession? If obviously we do need it to save time, but like you mentioned, if our saving time is the creative parts of our job is we're saving time on, what is that leaving time for? How does that feed into the capitalist nonsense? Like, what is all that?
It's funny. I just had a piece come out with Doug Belshaw and Laura Hilliger, and there's a bunch of podcasts, and one of the things that's always waiting in the side, is capitalism. We need to acknowledge the role of capitalism in all this. So two things. One is I think that as a classroom teacher, you are there's so many expectations on you already. There's not enough time in the day. There is not enough help and support. There's more and more mounting, expectations and rules and reports and things that you're going to do. And in many instances, less trust and less autonomy. And so not going to be a popular opinion, but if there are tools that are out there that can help support you and give you 20 minutes extra to go watch some Real Housewives or knit a sweater or sit in the closet and cry or have a Chianti, I say go for it. I think that good, like I said, good teachers borrow, great teachers modify. What's the difference between us pulling a lesson plan or a unit plan off the internet, or going to Teachers Pay Teachers or some of these other spaces? One of the negatives would be that it's bad pedagogy. It's bad teaching and learning. One of the positives could be that it's actually good teaching and learning and good pedagogy. And maybe because of, maybe you had a shoddy language and lit professor, in your teacher ed program. I was teaching a class and I would taught you bad info. In a way, it'd be good that you might get a different viewpoint. So I think that, I would see it being the agent being like a guide on the side or an assistant, a little virtual assistant that's in there to be like, hey, here's one thing that you might want to do, one way that you might want to approach this. And with all this, it's not going to be perfect, but, I think there's the opportunity to start to use these tools to help support you.
Also, have you given any thought to the like Ouroboros effect where we're seeing more things generated by AI being published and that kind of stuff gets then fed into the AI and then it becomes like how do those models evolve if we stop producing a lot of original work, I guess?
So I write, as Charlene said before, I blog way too much. There's already enough junk on the internet. And then I have a weekly newsletter where I'm just trying to make sense of what's happening. And that's been since I left my previous institution. I wanted a way to stay in touch with folks and also like document my thinking online. And that was the topic, one of the topics of last week, is that especially for non-native English speakers in other parts of the world, that there's already a lot of research is coming out suggesting that there's already a lot of like junk, a lot of AI created junk, especially in other languages that's out there. So it's sort of hard because there's already a lot of bogus stuff that's out where people are taking stuff that may or may not be reputable and then translating or just regurgitating it using the AI tools. The other thing is that one of the things I learned through the hackathon is that it's developing new tools and products is a challenge because you got to figure out what will make it to market, what people will use, hence capitalism. But then the other challenge is that what info do you use to train that model? So the finance economics model that we were creating, we were trying to create a bot that would watch as you're online and as you're searching and doing interactions, or as you're on your phone. This agent would watch what you're doing and say, hey, you're about to get defrauded. Not even critical evaluation, not fake news, but basically, you should probably not sign up for that and add your credit card info. And it's funny because as I was developing this with peers, a lot of them were like, nobody would use this. And I was like, my father-in-law was just ripped off. So people would definitely, and then I said, having a bot or a browser extension that could monitor, and then if and when you got hacked or raided or your bank account drained, could go back and say it was probably this group that did it. It's just a little warning light. And it was all about phishing scams and fake emails and stuff like that. So in order to train that bot, we needed to go find email scams, phishing scams, tweets, social media posts that are seeking to defraud you in multiple languages. There's not a lot out there. And so for a couple of weeks during the summer, I made a repository of 50 or 75 somewhat scandalous emails where people were seeking to defraud you. And I went online and searched it, and I used AI tools. But it's in order to have that bot that could try and defraud, that could recognize that you were going to get scammed, we needed to have versions of people getting scammed. And so with any of these tools, you have to think about the data going in. And so really, there's not a lot of good data out there to train the tools. So a lot of the field is moving to generated data. So they're basically having bots that will create the data in order to train the bot to go find the data, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's a big question mark.
Anybody else? Ian, a great big thank you. I've dropped a link to our feedback form in the chat. I'd love for Brooke and Tori and Stacy to go in and let us know how you feel about this webinar.
Terrified.
Well, it may leave us terrified, but you aren't terrifying.
Hey, I wouldn't go that far. I would just say, I'm thankful for the time. I would just urge us not to lose sight of what makes us human. I would encourage you to play with these tools. Play with the tools, try and figure out what they can and cannot do. We're at the bleeding edge of this, and we're all figuring it out together. So if you see something that's cool, I stole a bunch of the stuff that Tori already talked about. So if you see stuff that looks interesting, reach out. I always have an open door policy, so I'd love to chat more at any point.
Thank you so much.
My AI camera is like zooming in and out now as I talk. AI never
Brooke, it was a
stops.
pleasure to meet you. Stacy, I'm glad you joined us. Tori, congratulations on your master's, and
yeah,
may the force be with you. Until next month. Next month, we're going to be looking at striving readers and writers, and it may be a whole new audience, or you're welcome to come back and join us. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.
Good night,
Yay.
everybody.